Madam Chair, we're live.
Okay, at 5 o'clock, I will call to order the Finance Committee, and if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett,
Here.
Councillor Lindell. Come back.
I think she's in the building. Let me see if we can find her, but go ahead.
Okay, Councillor Rivera.
Here.
Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Chair Romero Worth.
I am here. And let's say that Councillor Lindell is excused until she arrives in the chamber.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. You have a quorum.
Great. And if we, do we have changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, no changes from staff.
Okay, can we get a motion?
Second.
Motion is second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. On to the consent agenda. I do believe we had one item pulled. Am I correct?
Correct, Madam Chair. Item F was removed from the consent agenda.
Okay, item F. Anything else from the committee? Item F is the request for authorization to sell potable water to the Santa Fe Country Club. And if there's nothing else that the committee would like to hear, can I get a motion? Move to approve as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? All righty. That motion passes as well. All right, I believe we are on to our presentation tonight, which is an audit update and overview from Director Oster. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am happy to share with you that we continue to make progress on the audits. We had a big deadline today to submit the final FY22 trial balance to Carr Riggs Ingram. We did that shortly before noon, so that's an important step. Carr Riggs Ingram will now begin pulling additional samples. We also had a lot of activity on the federal single audit side late last week. On Friday, Cheryl James was working closely with the team from CRI to provide information and going back and forth. So things are moving on FY22. I continue to be very sure and convinced that we have the right team in place and that the work is happening. It does take time to get caught up, and we will get there. We will continue to meet with Clifton Larson Allen, our consulting team, at least once a week, although often we're in communication multiple times a day. Our weekly meetings, though, are Mondays at 8:30, and we did have a good productive meeting this morning. Tomorrow on Tuesdays at 2 p.m., we have our joint meeting with Clifton Larson Allen, our consultant, and Carr Riggs Ingram, our external auditor. One of the requests that I plan to make tomorrow of Carr Riggs Ingram is that we get our PBC lists for FY23 because the governing body approved our contract last week for FY23, and Clifton Larson Allen has work papers available and they want to start adding them to the PBC list. So looking forward to getting that.
And if you could, just for the public, and I think members of this committee are familiar with a PBC list, part of the alphabet soup in city government, but maybe you could just spell that out and be clear about what that is.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. The PBC list stands for Prepared by Client, and it is the list of information that the auditors request so that they can conduct their audit. So it includes things like the trial balance, the full general ledger detail. One of the things that I was working on over the weekend was making sure that we have all of the documentation from when each of our outstanding bond series was originally issued. So I had requested from our bond counsel the transcript from when the bonds were sold in 2018 and 2019, making sure we have complete files on all of those outstanding debt issuances. There are a number of things. There's hundreds of items on the PBC lists. We actually have 4 different lists that we're working with for the city of Santa Fe. The first one is the initial trial balance and kind of updates about things that have changed. One of the things they asked was, did we change our IPRA policies from FY21 to FY22? Lots of questions like that, updates to policies and procedures, changes and things that we would consider to be what the auditors will sometimes refer to as a perm file or permanent file. Things, like I said, like policies and procedures, documentation related to debt or things that have a long life. So that's the first PBC list. We're pretty much done with that one. The second one is more of the stuff that's specific to a particular fiscal year, reconciliations of accounts related to that particular fiscal year's activity, specific, detail, the samples of transactions come there. The third PBC list is for payroll. So we, separate that out because it contains confidential information and only a small group of people have access to that because it contains payroll information. And then the last one is the federal single audit. So there's technically 4 prepared by client lists, but between the 4 of them, there are hundreds of items that are requested by the auditor for each year's audit. So we'll be requesting the PBC lists for FY23 tomorrow from CRI, and I imagine we'll get those in the near term. I do want to just, kind of recap some of the things that I talked about during my audit update last week. We have some really important key hires on board over the last year that are making this progress possible. Our grants manager, Cheryl James, is just an incredible resource. She's a wealth of knowledge and experience in federal compliance. So in addition to getting us through 4 federal single audits, 21, 22, 23, and then looking ahead to the current fiscal year, 24, she's also helping us implement changes that we need to make to improve our federal grant compliance and reporting as we go. We have our Chief Procurement Officer, Travis Dutton-Leda, who's spoken to you before. He is also a key part of our management structure and our control process, making sure that when we're expending federal and state funds and city funds, that we're following our procurement manual and that we're adhering to our own policies and procedures with regard to procurement. We have Josie Bolden, our controller, who's in place, and she's, only been here for a few months, but she's coming up to speed so fast, and we're really lucky to have her. She brings with her a lot of Munis experience, which is super helpful. She's used Munis and other entities and a robust knowledge of government accounting. So we're really delighted to have Josie on board as part of the team. We do have a hire in process for the Chief Accounting Officer, and I hope to be able to announce more about that soon. Looking forward to hopefully doing onboarding for that position in November. We continue to be grateful for excellent support and coordination from our partners in the other departments within the city. This really is an all hands on deck effort. We need help from all of the departments to accomplish the work of getting caught up on audits, and we have the support there. So I'm very grateful for that. We are moving forward as quickly as we can, and I know that the uncertainty about the timeline is frustrating, and it is for me as well. But getting the trial balance over to CRI today is a big deal and a necessary step. So I am pleased to report that that did happen as we discussed last week. As I know you're all aware of, as members of the Finance Committee in accounting and in finance in general, we're very focused on rules, and our work is very methodical. If we find a problem, we have to fix that before we can move on to the next step. So it can be an iterative process. If we identify an error or a correction that's needed, we have to stop and make the correction and then go back and double check the work and make sure everything looks good before we move on. We also have to be familiar with many different sets of laws, regulations, rules, and standards, and they're prescriptive and highly detailed. So it takes a lot of hard work to get up to speed on what's required for a large governmental entity like ourselves. From the CRI team, as I reported last week, they were working on capital assets and debt. They were working closely with Cheryl at the end of the week last week on the federal single audit. As I mentioned, the major programs for this FY22 audit are airport and homeland security. There is staff scheduled with CRI throughout the month of October. And now that they have the final trial balance and what they were referring to as a crosswalk, which is it's a report that they needed to tie the trial balance to Munis. They are going to be able to pull samples, and then we will start providing documentation for those items that they're requesting in their samples. On the CLA side, we have Chris Zuka with us in Santa Fe this week. He's one of the leads on our consulting team, and Chris was really instrumental, as well as his counterpart, Joan Scholes, who is our other lead, in getting that trial balance wrapped up today and turned over to CRI by noon. We have other team members from CLA working on the audit prep for FY23, and they are ready to start uploading to the PBC list, the prepared by client list for FY23. So we're hoping that CRI can get that set up so they can start uploading those work papers. I mentioned last week that I recently celebrated being with the city for 1 year, which is something I'm really proud of and grateful for. And I did just want to recap some of the accomplishments, just because I think it is important to take a moment to reflect back, when we reach a milestone like this. For me, being with the city for a year. So I'm just going to go through a couple of those just to kind of remind everyone of where did we start a year ago and where are we now? What have we accomplished over the past year? So going back a little bit before my time, I want to highlight that the city made the decision to simplify and consolidate its accounting consulting into one firm with nationally recognized governmental experience. I think this is really important to our success. The approach that the city had taken before of trying to spread the work out among a number of different firms was difficult to manage and, just wasn't working. So the decision, which I support, to consolidate with one firm has served the city very well, and that firm has been doing excellent work. And I want to give credit to Alexis Lotero and Ricky Bejarano for doing that work between April and September of 2022 to get through the procurement process and start that transition from a multi-firm approach to the one consulting firm. Another item where I want to give credit to Mr. Bejarano and Ms. Lotero, as well as Thomasina Chavez, was the implementation of the month-end close process in FY23, which we completed for all of FY23, and we've continued into FY24. We've completed the first 2 months, and just today, Josie started sending out email reminders that we're now in the month of October, and we're starting the close process for September. This is a really important step towards getting information recorded into the Munis system timely and accurately. Having a month-end close process is really going to be essential to staying caught up as we move forward. And then that feeds into the next accomplishment, which is a robust and sequential process for the year-end close, which we completed for FY23. We published a memo in March that included a series of deadlines ranging from March 31st all the way through September 29th. Throughout that entire period, we've had extensive communication with city staff, many reminders, training on different parts of the process and on the process as a whole. And, I am pleased to say that the FY23 year-end close process went much more smoothly than 22. And much more quickly and clean. And so really, good progress there in terms of month-end close feeding into the year-end close process. I don't want us to forget about the Munis upgrade. Upgrading from version 2011 to version 2019 was a huge lift and a major accomplishment for the whole city. That happened at the end of January of 2023. Later on in the spring, actually starting last fall and stretching into the spring, our bond ratings were affirmed by Fitch Ratings and S&P. And S&P, while they initially put us on a credit watch, resolved that when they affirmed our rating in June. We successfully completed our FY24 operating budget on time and submitted that to the State Department of Finance and Administration by June 1st. I really want to thank the Finance Committee for your role in that. That involved over 9 different hearings just on the budget alone throughout the month of April, stretching into May. So that was a significant time commitment and a big accomplishment for the committee and for the city as a whole. The budget is the largest operating budget, the largest initial operating budget in city history for FY24, with total revenues of $413.9 million and total expenditures of $403.4 million. So that's a significant accomplishment as well, to have a historic, the budget being a historically large budget. We submitted our quarterly audit status reports to the Office of the State Auditor on time on March 15th, June 15th, and September 15th. This is my 37th audit update of this calendar year. I didn't go back and count the ones in 2022, so we can keep a running total if anyone's interested, but that basically translates to approximately 1 per week. The FY21 audit, of course, was submitted to the state auditor on June 30th and released on July 31st. Some highlights of that FY21 audit include the resolution of 10 FY20 audit findings that were resolved in 2021. That's almost 50%, almost half of the 20 audit findings that were reported in FY20. We had an unmodified opinion on the financial statements in the FY21 audit, which is the best opinion that you can have. Switching over to personnel, we have filled key vacancies and started working on team building and developing a cohesive unit, which is really critical to our success. Building a strong team in the finance department will allow us to continue our momentum and build on it going forward. Over the past year, we've hired and retained 11 new staff members, and we've promoted 7 staff members from within. I think I mentioned last week, we have a number of recruitments that I hope will result in new folks coming on board in the month of October, and maybe a couple of more internal promotions. So excited about that. Looking at potentially having the lowest vacancy rate in my tenure in the month of October. So really hoping that we can get those recruitments over the finish line and get more team members onboarded, as well as continue to develop our existing staff and prepare them for the next step, and then promote them into whatever the next step is for their interests and their expertise. In terms of recruitment, we, on the purchasing officer side, I want to highlight that our new purchasing officer, Travis Dutton-Leda, began a project to implement the e-procurement module in Munis to modernize, streamline, and expedite procurement. That's exciting. That is functionality that the city already owned but hadn't been using. And I just heard an update this morning that project is on track to implement by the end of the calendar year. So that's very exciting. Also on the IT project side, I want to highlight the grants, project ledger, project accounting project that's being jointly led by Cheryl James on the functional side and Patrick Lucero for the technical side. And that project is really essential to resolving a number of our audit findings, both for general ledger controls and also on the single audit side. And really the key takeaway there is it will allow us to put information into the general ledger about specific grants that will then allow us to report on the grants at that general ledger level, which is required for many federal grants. Let's see. So in addition to the 37 audit updates to the governing body this year, we of course will continue to keep you updated. We have a number more still coming for this calendar year. And just to close, I know this is a little bit longer update today, but I really just want to reiterate that as I reflect back on where we were at this time last year, when I had been on board just for a couple of weeks, and where we are now, it's a huge difference. We've made a lot of progress. We still have work to do, and we're not moving as fast as we want to, but we are accomplishing a lot. And I am 100% convinced that we will get there. So I know it's difficult, that it's taking longer than we all would like, but we are making progress and we're moving in the right direction. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Oster. And, thank you for sticking it out with us over the year and not running for the hills after 2 weeks. Because this represents this update about what you've been doing in the last year I agree, it's significant work. And, that mountain must have looked pretty steep when you first started. So I appreciate that you have stayed with us. You are very knowledgeable. And I know you're making a difference. So I just continue to appreciate the difficult circumstances under which you are trying to right the ship, and it's much appreciated. Questions from the committee? That was pretty extensive. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Oster, I think you covered it, but you went through it pretty quick. But there were 20 findings, I think, that were in the 20 audit findings? Will the next one begin at that point where those findings left off? And, some may have been fixed already. Some of them may not have been, but will they start there and then look at a brand new set of, targets or budgets that they'll look at specifically?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, that's an excellent question. So one of the procedures that the auditors always perform as part of their audit is reviewing the findings from the previous audit and asking for an update. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll provide an update on where we're at with the resolution. And then they test that. And if they feel that the issue has been resolved, then the finding will be marked as resolved. Another option is it could be repeated and modified. So maybe we've resolved some aspects of it, but not all. It's very common for something to initially show up as a material weakness or a significant deficiency, and for an entity to make progress, but not completely resolve it, and to have the level of severity reduced to, for example, a control deficiency or something at a lower level of seriousness. Some of these things are a bigger lift that take time to resolve. So it's fairly common to see something repeated and modified, but at a lower level of severity in a subsequent year. And then sometimes things are just multi-year projects and they're repeated and modified. In our case, because there's a fairly long period of time that's passed from when the end of the fiscal year happened and when the audits are being performed, some of the things just, they are what they are. And that was especially true for FY21. But as we move into FY22 and then into FY23, I am confident that we're going to see progress. So in answer to your question, one of the procedures that an auditor always performs is follow up on the previous year's findings. And they're required to test those to make sure that the issues have been resolved. If they haven't, they may repeat the finding or they may repeat it and modify it based on what they're seeing in the next fiscal year.
And are there any issues with not fixing the problem from the first one, since our audits are so close together?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I do expect there will be some findings that are repeated between FY21 and FY22. I also think that there was significant progress, particularly with regard to the CDBG federal funding in the early part of FY22. There was a finance department employee, Kathy Thompson, who was hired specifically to work on CDBG. from the finance perspective, and she's been doing a phenomenal job. There were also additions to the staff in affordable housing, which manages the CDBG funding. Cody Minich was hired. There's a consultant that was brought on to assist with CDBG compliance, and that work all occurred in FY22. So I'm optimistic that we'll see some of those FY20 findings that were repeated in 21 be resolved in 22, particularly with respect to the CDBG program, because the city recognized that there was a need to, add additional staff and consulting resources. And that work was done in 22. So I'm optimistic that those findings will just be resolved, or at least will be repeated at a less severe level.
And then at the update that you gave at council, I don't know if it was you or city manager Blair that said that there was ongoing discussions with the state regarding the letter that was sent. Any updates on that?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I have not had any updates on that today. So I don't have any new information there, other than to just reiterate that we're trying to get a better sense of, what DFA is offering as a part of that letter and directing the city to do, and what that would involve from the city's perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. It was a good deep dive for us, so I appreciate that. We are going to our consent calendar now. We did have one item pulled, and I believe it was item F, correct? Yes. So item F is a request for authorization to sell potable water to the Santa Fe Country Club and the Municipal Recreation Complex pursuant to Chapter 24-4.1, Rule 17, temporary and special services up to 700,000 gallons per day for the club, and looks like 1,400,000 gallons per day for the MRC at a rate of $6.06 per 1,000 gallons, the city's base rate for water. In the event that the club or the MRC takes more water than their initial allotments, the base rate increases to $21.72 per 1,000 gallons. Thereafter, subject to the availability of potable supply and unavailability of treated effluent. And we do have tonight John Dupuy, our Public Utilities Department Director, with us to answer questions. And I believe there were a couple of different counselors who pulled this item. I don't know which one of you wants to start. Counselor Lindell, and welcome Director Dupuy. Nice haircut, by the way.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I have just a couple of basic questions on this. How did we calculate the amount of water for each property?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the amount that is identified as 700,000 for the Santa Fe Country Club is what is referenced in their contract for effluent deliveries. And we didn't scrutinize that amount. We just provide for that amount because it was what was previously available to them. And then the quantity available for the MRC complex is specific to the amount identified by the customer as what has been previously needed in the past. So limited to that amount.
So the 700 existing, we just went with what our existing was on treated effluent?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, that's correct. It does coincide with the peak day usages that we've seen from them within a small margin of error. We've seen them in the above 600,000 to 650,000 gallons a day.
Okay. is that, I mean, we're in some difficulties with our existing agreement. I mean, it's no secret, we're in a court case on that, or we're in mediation, I guess, at this point. What's our term of obligation on this?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the request limits it to the current unavailability of effluent for the country club and MRC. Currently, the MRC has been provided effluent through the Los Campanas transferred infrastructure to the city, and the Santa Fe Country Club has made meaningful efforts in the past, and most recently had a few unexpected hurdles in trying to connect to that facility. But ultimately, we own the MRC infrastructure and could provide that interconnectivity, whereas we do not own the conveyance infrastructure to get from the plant to the country club. So we rely on them, and we're very open and cooperative to provide access to any excess effluent that we have through that transferred infrastructure from Los Campanas.
I'm still just a little bit confused about, is there a term? Is this a contract that we're signing with this, or what is this that we're saying 700,000 gallons per day? I mean, is there a term on this? When is it reviewable? I don't want us to be in another situation where we're headed toward court. It's not good for anybody.
If I can, I think what we're approving here is a rate for this particular, up to this particular level of water.
Madam Chair,
Based on the contract for with the county, or I'm sorry, based on the contract with the club and based on the history of water use at MRC. Is that? So we're approving what the rate is.
or Madam Chair, that is correct. And just for clarification, is the rate for potable water that would be supplied to either entity.
What if things change and we need to charge more than 606 per thousand?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, this request would end when effluent would become available to either entity. Currently, the MRC does have effluent supplied to them, so it would not continue to be an option for them. And also, we are working through a corrective action plan at the wastewater facility. Once disinfection, supplemental disinfection was achieved for the reuse facility, going to MRC, and it does also have the potential to provide for Los Campanas. Then we shifted our focus to supplemental disinfection, utilizing that knowledge gained for improving the supplemental disinfection potential for the effluent going to the Santa Fe River. So that's something we're currently issued a emergency procurement request and are utilizing Carollo, an engineering consultant, to work with us to get permission from the environmental regulator, the EPA. We met with them on September 28th. They gave us permission to implement the supplemental chlorination with explanation as we proceed, and we're making plans on the proper process improvements needed to accomplish that. So I would anticipate within, unfortunately, it's probably the end of this irrigation season that we would have that ability.
Appreciate that. What I'm trying to get to though is, we're agreeing to $6.06 per 1,000 gallons. How long are we agreeing to that for in terms of, is this a contract that 2 years from now, is that going to be enough per 1,000 gallons? Is it, or is it going to be $8? Is it going to be 10? What's the term that we're agreeing to this?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the term would be, for example, if the example timing of what I just described was the end of November, then once that effluent quality was able to be diverted from our facility to the country club, then this request would end.
Okay, so that would be terrific. What happens then next May if we don't have treated effluent? Are we obligated to this rate?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, my understanding, and I'm the one who participated in drafting it, and the intent is that they would not. Once we have effluent available to divert to them, then we would have to come back and ask for permission again.
Okay, I think that that's a really important point in this, that this rate only stands until we deliver non-potable treated effluent. And once we deliver treated effluent, then this rate, this authorization goes away.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to be very, very clear about that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my same questions that I had. I think the way I understand this, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is somewhat of a retroactive agreement. This was for the time period in the summer when we were using potable water. And so we're putting this agreement in retroactively to set a rate until we were talking about, until it stands, or until there's treated effluent, until that becomes available. Did I get that right?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that is correct.
Okay.
And it's consistent with what we've done in the past. The language and extent to which we're making potable available specifically for the country club was addressed in a previous iteration when the plan had a similar problem. I tried to stay consistent with our practices.
So because of that situation, we've allowed for these two, the club and the MRC, to have the same rate until we actually get the treated effluent back online.
Correct.
Okay. And so, and then the other factor that Lindell brought up is that we are still in litigation, so that fair rate of treated effluent is still being negotiated. Is that correct?
I would defer from answering specifically to where we're at with regards to that. I participate in the process to some extent, but I'm not fully informed on all the details.
Okay. But that also would determine this agreement potentially as well, right?
It would not influence how much we're selling them the potable water for, while this would still be authorized.
Okay. And then just so we can get an idea, do you know, I know this is a temporary under Chapter 25, a temporary and special services agreement. What were we charging before this agreement came into place for the country club?
prior to this agreement, we would have the same base rate up to their allocation dependent upon the size meter they were using. In this particular instance, it would be 160,000 gallons. So above 160,000 gallons, they would are currently, the rate is structured such that they would have to pay the higher amount of $21.72. Thank you. I was trying to pull it up faster, but you're good.
The $21.72, you said that be above 160 gallons, 160,000 gallons, 160,000 gallons. That was the previous rate. This is a special rate.
Well, that's the rate currently in place. This would authorize the deviation from that up to 700,000 gallons a day at the base rate.
Trying to think if there was another question I had. I think that was it. I was just trying to understand what the rate is currently and then what it's changing this to, and then the fact that this will only stay in place until we start delivering treated effluent. Okay. No further question.
Counselor Lindell?
Does it say in our packet that this is retroactive? I didn't see that.
Madam Chair, I didn't see it, but I've asked questions to try to understand how this works. So I don't know if I think we probably should state that somewhere.
Quite a lot of difference.
Well, I think there are two things that are coming up here. One is the length of time, the term, which Counselor Lindell probed earlier. And then, is this going forward from the moment the governing body approves it, or is this going back in time to the beginning of the summer or whenever it was that we started using potable water? I assume we're approving, it's interesting because we're not really approving a contract or an agreement per se. We're being asked, again, this is where we're being asked to set a rate. And so the requested action is approval of request for authorization to sell potable water to the Santa Fe Country Club and the Municipal Recreation Complex pursuant to Rule 17, temporary and special services up to 700,000 gallons per day for the Santa Fe Country Club and 1,400,000 gallons per day for the MRC at a rate of $6.06 per 1,000 gallons and $21.72 per 1,000 gallons thereafter, subject to the availability of potable water and the unavailability of treated water. So I guess that's the thing we're approving, right? Are those words, but it doesn't say for what period of time.
Madam Chair, so in the background and summary further explains that the spring of 2023 is when the current treatment plant process disruption occurred, and that the long-term, until long-term solutions are complete, this request provides a potable water alternative source for some sites, but the city's preference is to use treated effluent for Paseo Real Water Reclamation Facility whenever possible. So those are the two limits in terms of when it would be applied. They didn't start taking potable water until the beginning of April. So slightly after when the treatment plant process was upset, which was at the very end of March. So from that beginning period until when we can serve them again, that's when we would this would apply to.
Counselor Lindell.
That's what this says.
So Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, where there is the subject to availability of potable supply and the unavailability of treated effluent. that's
Where are you there?
That is in the request, the last sentence of the request.
Oh, I see.
So once potable or treated effluent is available, they would no longer have this rate available.
Councilwoman Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I think what we have here is just maybe not as much specificity in the caption, and I'm not sure it's not legislation, so I'm not sure what amending the caption would do to say beginning with April, whatever that precise date is, until the availability of effluent is there again. So I would recommend that we make that amendment so that that is clear. I don't believe that that should gum up the process because it's not legislation, so we can just be changed, or I'm not sure about that. Great question. It hasn't gone through committee. I'd probably have to go straight to discussion at that juncture.
And Madam Chair, that's consistent with the intent of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
Why hasn't a date been put in here? I mean, why wasn't that specificity in there? You be just because you think you know what you mean and
Madam Chair, I agree. A date would provide greater specificity.
yeah.
There's also juggling simplicity in requests.
Well, and I don't think you want to amend the caption. I think you want to make clear what the requested action is. But maybe you need to do both. I don't know.
Madam-
But I guess on the outside, back to Councillor Lindell's side, on the outer side. So let's say, so this is basically, I mean, once we hit winter, this is not going to be necessary, correct?
Well, I would limit the outside bound to when treated effluent becomes available again.
So back to Councillor Lindell's points. I mean, you're hoping that that's next spring, right? But what happens if there's some glitch and doesn't happen till, say, July? Do you come back to us, or
If we have not been able to make effluent available to them,
by the time they need it again,
then
Does-
this
does
rate
this-
would continue.
this continues? All right, so that's a little bit different answer than I think you gave Councillor Lindell earlier, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, Councillor Lindell, what did you think you heard?
I never heard in this that this was a request for a retroactive of charge. Secondly, what I asked was, what is the term? And I'm not trying to go into the weeds or nitpick this, but we're already in a legal dispute on this item, and I don't want to make it worse, and I don't want it to continue. So I think that we need to get very, very clear about what we're talking about here.
So what I'm hearing is the intent of this rate that you're asking us to approve starts in April when they started using it
Correct.
and will continue for whatever period of time. Could be next spring that we have effluent available,
Right.
could be next fall. But I mean, your intent to get it done by next spring, but maybe it doesn't happen until next fall because there's some glitch. This stays in place. You don't come back to us. This is going to be the overarching rate until we have effluent again.
Madam Chair, you're correct on the intent.
And I guess and then what happens if we go for some period of time and, we're good with effluent, let's say for a year, and then we have another upset? Does this rate kick back in, or
Madam
you'd
Chair,
have
the
to,
intent
you'd
would
have
be
to,
that we
come-
would be required to come back.
you'd have to come back?
That's correct.
And is that because of the way these emergency rules are built, this temporary and special services?
Madam Chair, I don't think that that's specific to why that intent is there, but it may coincide. I would have to reread.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just reading. So that rule number 17, which you've provided for us under letter B, says the rate to be charged for water supplied under temporary service will be in accordance with the city's existing applicable schedules for commercial or residential service as appropriate. Water service for specialized use shall be considered as a special case when not covered by a specific filed rate scheduled for the specialized usage. Now that I thought answered it. Now it mucks me up a little bit. Counselor Cassett.
Want to go? You had your hand up first. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't, you got to wave at me more.
I'm on this point, so I, if I'm understanding correctly, the dollar amounts are staying the same. I'm guessing those, but it is up to the certain gallon that we're really looking at. We're basically increasing the gallon amount that would trigger the increase in rate, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, that is correct.
And is the original, where was that number? So normally it would go up. When would it trigger an increase at 160,000? Is that what's written? Is that what this is referring to when it's talking about the regular rates for Rule 17? When it says will be in accordance with the city's existing applicable schedules for commercial residential service as appropriate. So
Correct.
that is the applicable schedule. And we're basically saying we're going to allow the 606 up to a higher amount. So if my understanding is correct, that in the event that we have effluent available again, and then we do not have effluent available again, it would go back to the 606 up to 160,000 automatically, unless you came back to us with something similar in nature again. Is that what I understand?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, unless we had a rate change in between, it would just go to the applicable rate.
Okay.
Whatever that is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Counselor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So similar question, the rates are in Rule 17, correct? The 606 and the 2172 are currently in Chapter 25, Rule 17.
Correct.
All we're looking at,
Actually, I believe the specific dollar amounts are referenced and as an exhibit to the end of chapter 25.
but those are the current rules for even
Correct.
commercial users, right? Those are the amounts that we would charge even commercial users. All right, you had said this had been done in the past under previous directors. I had never seen this come before the council. Were they following the $160,000 or 160,000 gallon rule? Or were they reverting back to?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, when it previously came to the governing body, it was a special meeting and it was to cover approximately a 10-day period where potable water was supplied in the past. So it was retroactive as well, but they had already obtained providing effluent when the requests came forward.
Right, and the 1.4 million gallons per day for the MRC, the 160,000 gallon mark would apply to them also, so they'd have to pay significantly more than anybody else for using potable water.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that's correct.
All right, and then I believe you said that treated effluent is currently.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, treated effluent is currently available to the MRC complex and Swan Park. And they haven't used it, but it is still physically available to the club at Los Campanas.
So all there is really is a connection issue or connectivity issue with the country club?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that's correct. So the piping from the 2 million gallon tank and subsequent booster station is currently only connected to those facilities. And the country club, if they were able to configure their pipe to be connected to it, would be able to be supplied as well.
Do they have a connect?
I'm sure Councilor Rivera, they do not have a timeframe. Up until 3 weeks ago, they were making regular steady progress. And we thought they were in very close proximity. Come to find out, whenever they brought equipment in and started excavating, their signal that they used to trace where their pipe is was following an electrical line, not the water line that was intended, and our effluent line. So they're back at square one in terms of locating their pipe within our facility, which we do not have clear plans on, and they do not have clear plans on.
Is the connection to the 2 million gallon tank or to wastewater?
It would be Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, it would be the connection to the discharge side of the pump station that comes off of the 2 million gallon tank, just for clarity purposes, but effectively off of the 2 million gallon tank.
They hadn't had to use the 2 mil. I never used it.
That's correct.
That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Can you just repeat that? It's on the discharge side of the what?
Pump station that's connected to the 2 million gallon tank. That provided us the opportunity to separate and distinct from the treatment plant process to implement supplemental chlorination disinfection, which we were able to get permission from NMED, who oversees the reuse discharge permit we have, which goes to the reuse customers, very quickly. In terms of permission from the EPA, it's taken us this long to get a meeting with them. They've been just being straightforward, non-responsive initially. And our consultant has really aided in getting that opportunity to have that discussion and helping us with that discussion.
And so in order to do the supplemental disinfection, you had to be able to use the tank for that process?
Madam Chair, that is correct. That's where we obtain some contact time for the disinfection to occur. And we may have ways to accomplish that within our plant by going further upstream prior to the discharge point. But it's non-traditional. We haven't tried it before. We need technical support. It's a complicated process that we are still working through today. But that would be the intent moving forward, is now we have great data on the nutrient demand, like how fast that chlorine is consumed. And if it's possible to effectively accomplish that within the section of upstream infrastructure that we have within the plant.
Right. And so the supplemental disinfection is the chlorine, and the nature of that chemical is what's you're having to make sure is used in a safe way.
Correct.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Madam Chair, I'm just wondering if we still need to explicitly state the time that this kicked in and where it would go, and if it needs an update to the caption or
Well,
I'm unsure. but I feel like
yeah,
it's not-
I really don't want to touch the caption if at all possible. We don't have anybody here from the city attorney's office. Don't think.
Madam Chair, in the past, haven't we just updated the memo?
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird thing, right? Because it's not like I think Councilwoman Villarreal's point, or maybe it was Council Cass, I can't remember, but you know, it's not legislation. It's not a contract per se. Again, we're approving a rate, but what exactly the thing is that's the official document is confusing. So I don't know, maybe what we do is maybe we should approve this with the recommendation that by the time it hits governing body, we need to be very clear about the term when it starts and the fact that, well, the end is a little bit, I mean, you could argue, and again, I agree with Counselor Lindell that, you know, we don't want to do anything to add more complication or controversy or misunderstanding with the country club. So I, you know, this idea that this is the rate until it's subject to the availability of potable supply and the unavailability of treated effluent. You could get into an argument about exactly when that was. Like if we give effluent and then for a period of time we do effluent and then we're not able to for some reason, could they argue that they're back at this rate? Or how do we know that we have to come back and approve it again? So it seems like,
Madam Chair, if I could make a
yeah,
suggestion in terms of
sure.
going through the end of the calendar year would mean through the end of the irrigation season, which may be more difficult to define. But it substantively means the same thing because they're not going to take effluent whenever it's below freezing outside.
Right. So, and then what does that do? And then you think that there'll be effluent available to them in the spring?
Not- Madam Chair, if not, then I'll be coming back and asking for a subsequent request.
Madam Chair, can I just clarify? We're not talking about the rate. We're talking about gallons. Because the rate is established for everyone, for commercial users.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, it would be that the 606 rate would apply when previously the 2172 is applicable. So it is a rate for the gallons up to a certain amount. So it is a different rate.
But it's the rate that's in there currently regardless of who the user is.
Correct.
We're just extending the amount of gallons available before it kicks up to the 2172.
That's correct.
Okay.
I guess I think we need to recommend that the term be defined to us by the time it gets to governing body. I'm a little hesitant I kind of feel like we need the city attorney's office to weigh in terms of what the term is, what the specific date of when this rate, what date we're going back to. And I agree with you. It would be good to have a firm date on the outer side. So if it's easier rather than to say the end of the irrigation season, because that's not any better really than until there's treated effluent, it may be, a hard date of the end of the year, and then we'll see where we are. And then we come back and do this again. But at least it's very clear the start and the end so that we don't, again, I don't want any more confusion around this.
Madam Chair, I agree. It makes it meaningfully clear for all involved.
So I don't know. Wishes of the committee, I think we should approve this contingent on a term beginning and end be provided at the governing body meeting. And then whatever that means, the city attorney's office can work with Director Dupuy. And, if it's a caption change, then that's a snowball issue, I think. But Councilor Lindell.
Just a question on this because Councilor Rivera, you made a really good point. instead of going with just the number that we've used in the past, did we monitor how much water was used this summer?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I mentioned that earlier, the recent usage this summer was plus 600,000, varying between over 6 to 650. 650,000 gallons a day.
Why
So
don't-
so this gives a little buffer.
So why didn't we go with that number?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I think that it's meaningful to stay consistent with what we've made available to them. And it is meaningfully close to the amount that they've used with some small buffer that may be needed for one purpose or another that's unanticipated.
But you also said that's the contract amount. So
That's right.
I don't know that I mean, we are in litigation over the contract, but I don't think, the contract's still the contract. So 700,000 is the legal number. And it does give a buffer from the actual usage. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'm trying to understand that is kind of bothering me about this is that we didn't change the rate, but we're allowing for more gallon usage of potable water, not of effluent. And I think what I'm having a hard time is we're allowing for more potable water to be used with this rate, this authorization. I don't know. I just have a hard time with it. It's like potable water. So we're trying to find a middle ground here to make up for the situation that happened this summer. But this is potable water now, right?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, it would only be to the extent potable water is available. And there was one day this year where we did have to call the country club and tell them that they could not use water that particular day. It was because we were having pump replacement occurring, and it limited our ability to provide for potable water. So we were proactive in just telling them, you're going to be the first one that is not supplied, because ultimately it's a questionable or less preferred use of potable water.
It's a preferred use.
Less preferred.
Yeah. Well, anytime potable water for golf courses to me is the wrong move. And I'm just wondering if what else we explored as options, because I don't know. I just don't like using potable water for golf courses, whether it's the club or MRC. And I know that was trying to save the grass, but I'm also, I just have a hard time with this. Because we really, from going from 160,000 gallons to 700,000, it's a big jump. So, I don't know. This is getting more complex as we talk about it. I'll yield the floor back.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councilor Cassett and then Councilor Rivera.
So just to thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, though, we're not putting they were already using 650,000 gallons. So this does not change their max usage. It just changes where the cost jumps. Correct?
Correct.
So we're not saying that before they were kind of held to 160,000 gallons, they were already using above that. We're just changing the rate for them.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassidy, that's correct.
Okay. I would imagine they probably have an interest in being as efficient as possible because they don't want to spend this money as well. Okay. I think that helps in terms of it's not necessarily giving them, they can use as much as they want as is available. It's just their choice on if they want to use so much that it jumps the rate or they spend more money. Okay, thank you.
Counselor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I know there's a lot of focus on the country club for this, but I know they're metered. Do we know how much water MRC used during that time where we didn't have effluent, how much potable water they used?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is a number that we have. I don't have it at my fingertips, but we can provide it.
Is it the 1.4 million gallons?
That was the max per day.
per day. All right. So if they were having to pay the higher rate after 160,000 gallons, just doing some quick math, they would owe $26,932 and $932,800 per day at that $21 rate. So that's a lot of money, and it would be the same rate, I imagine, for both your fund that isn't self-sufficient fund. So I imagine that money would have to be transferred from parks to wastewater or water. So it's a lot of money. That's something to think about. It's not just the country club we're looking at. Oh, man.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is, I mean, this is what's been going on because the effluent wasn't available. This is, we're just, again, I see this as we're setting a rate. And as we've talked about tonight, deciding where that, at what point of usage do you get into the higher bracket? But it's a hit to both users, for sure. And, I think one of many reasons why we need to get the effluent situation figured out and why there is, what did you call it? A corrective action plan, which you've been spearheading pretty aggressively. And also we have on the ICIP list prioritized the wastewater treatment plant for some serious upgrades and improvements, modernization. And this is one of many reasons why we need to be doing that. Other questions, thoughts? I mean, it seems to me that maybe what we do is we approve this. I think we need to keep it moving because of the nature of it. We approve this, but we would like to see a term, a hard start and a hard finish by governing body.
Madam Chair, I'll work with the county attorney or the city attorney's office to make sure that that's properly inserted and worded.
Does that seem reasonable to the committee?
Moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this item with the recommendation that a term be defined, both a start and an end. If there's not further comment, discussion, we'll go to a roll call vote.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Abstain.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director Dupuy, for being with us tonight. If you weren't here, I don't know what we would have done. All right, so that's the end of our consent agenda. We don't have discussion items or an executive session, so we'll go to matters from staff. Director Oster, do you have anything else to tell us tonight?
None at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. The only thing I have is that our next meeting will be Monday, October 16th. And